So just a few notes for you as you are logging in. I know I usually serve as the moderator. Today I'm not. I'm here for tech support. So if you have any technical issues during the class, please send those to me. I'll be monitoring the chat. If you have a question for David, Michael, or Joel, send those to the Q&A box, and David is going to be monitoring those questions today. If it's fine if you send it to the chat, I'll just redirect you so that David can see the question. All right, so finally, we are recording today's class, so if you have to leave early for any reason, the recording will be available sometime tomorrow. And just so that everybody knows, because I know we've been having more people logging on from around the country. These are native trees for the Virginia area, Northern Virginia, and Garden Zone 7. So just so that everybody is aware, it will still be a great class, even if you are from a different region. Just be aware that they're for this region specifically. All right, David, I'm going to hand it over to you. I know you guys have a lot of material to cover, and I'm looking forward to it. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sally, and thank everybody else for joining us today. As Sally mentioned, our local association or group here called Plant Nova Natives has declared October Native Tree Month, just really to highlight the value, the importance of just all the wonders that our native trees can provide to us. Of course, we should be aware of this and giving recognition and thanks and appreciating our native trees every day of the year. But like I said, we're going to focus our attention on that today. And so joining us, I think all of you may have seen all of us in some of these classes and sessions before. Myself, David Yost. I'm kind of stepping in this moderator role for today. And then Joel Cooke and Michael Fahey are joining us, both of them working in our nursery with tree specialists. I will say for myself, I'm a Virginia native, and I have loved trees since I was a child. So, that's something I absolutely have been working with. Started, I think, I was working in the Forest Service. I was trying to remember, I was 16, 17 years old and really dialed into the native flora that's here, the trees in particular, and decided that was absolutely going to be a part of my life that's here. So this is especially exciting for me. And I'm going to turn it over to Michael and Joel. I want both of you to give a real quick introduction, maybe to a little bit about who you are and how you came to fall in love with our native trees.
Joel, you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Joel Cooke. I've been working with Merrifield for 16 or 17 years now, I think.
Yep.
And I guess I've always been in love with nature. I joke that I was born outside, born in the woods, and raised by wolves and that sort of thing. So
outdoor dog.
Yeah, definitely. I'm an outdoor dog. So yeah, no, I mean, I love trees, just all that, just being outside, and it's just sort of a magical environment. And then working in the garden center and being immersed in all this wonderful plant material is it's a dream come true.
Yeah,
I'm getting all emotional.
No, Joel, looks to me to cross check how long he's been working here at the garden center, because he and I started like maybe 2-3 weeks apart, maybe not even that far apart. So but similar to Joel, I've been here 16 going on 17 years. As David mentioned, Virginia natives ourselves. It's funny, David mentioned how he kind of got involved in trees and his upbringing, and I was always running through the woods, playing in the woods as a kid. That's what we did. And at some point I remember was with a good buddy of mine, and he had been running a campground, actually the one down here at Burke Lake, and he had been working at the campground as a camp store manager for about a year. And we were walking, and he wanted to show me this massive tree he found in the forest. And I said, when we walked up to the tree, I said, "What kind of tree is it?" So this thing is beautiful. And he said, "Well, I don't know, maybe an ash or something. I don't know." And I said, "York, you've been working here for a year. You took me to this tree to show me this tree, but you don't even know what kind of tree it is. I mean, how can..." So at the time he was going away to school, and I was just getting into hort school at the time. And I remember telling him, I said, "When you come back from Arizona, I'm going to be able to tell you all the names of all of the different trees in the forest here." And then that was kind of how my actual studies and arboriculture developed. So that's funny, David. It's very, very similar to the way that you got into it. So, but similar to Joel, again, working here 16, 17 years, fully immersed in our, garden center and the plant end of the business. We are on our buying team, so we take a lot of trips, travel, see a lot of trees, hand tag the stuff that's coming into the garden center for our customers. I happen to be an arborist as well, an ISA certified arborist. So I do handle a lot more of the tree side of our plant sections than what some other people do. So yeah, I'm just thrilled to be a part of this. Again, native Virginian myself, absolutely immersed in plants and wildlife constantly, and thrilled to be able to contribute to Native Tree Week here. So
Absolutely. Well, again, it's great to have all of you with us here today. So this is a discussion on native plants, a panel discussion on native plants. So I've kind of asked Michael and Joel kick this thing off with a conversation about our native trees. But please send in any of your questions. We're going to do that via the chat function, since we can't actually see or hear you. But send questions, as we really want to hear from you about not just questions, but also comments, experiences, anything you want to add to today's program, just so we can all learn from each other. So with that, I am muting myself and turning it over to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, David. And again, you're saying you're muting yourself, but since it's a discussion, I think it'd be great for us to, all be involved in it. We did put together a little presentation so we can at least have some talking points here. Again, we're coming up on, debatably everybody's favorite time of year, autumn in Virginia. Certainly a special time. October, I know, is my favorite month for sure. This is a scene from just a little bit west of here, peak autumn, really. So I think, and David, you probably jive with this thought too. We want to talk about native trees. I still always think about my first lesson when it came to trees and planting and landscaping, which was always the right tree, the right place. And I know Bruce Nash always felt real adamantly that we included the right function also in that thought. But no matter what we're talking about, we always want to be considerate of putting the right tree in the right place. Just because something's native doesn't necessarily mean that you want to put a sycamore, 30 inches off the corner of your house as a foundation planting. And then, again, the right tree, right place, overstory canopy, I think is very important to consider versus understory canopies. So first grouping trees we want to talk about, we're going to consider them overstory canopies, larger trees. That seemed like a great place to start, some of our larger native trees. And I thought a good way to kick it off would be with oaks. So Quercus is oak. Oak is our, one of our most diverse tree species. I always say one of the more promiscuous species of trees. They cross-pollinate a lot. We get a lot of different hybrids coming up. I put Quercus alba at the top there. That's white oak. That's our national tree, and for a very good reason. This is an image of a white oak, field grown out in the middle, no competition, perfect shape from head to toe. Absolutely your quintessential large oak tree, and they provide such great benefits for wildlife. But then you think about that front yard tree out in the country that you're going to put a rope swing on also, and then you think about the ornamental value that they have in the landscape, and it's just a fabulous tree. I don't know, some of these other ones are outstanding as well. I don't know if you got any favorites, Joel or David.
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked the white oak. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just something so stately about it and durable. I'm all about structure and branching habit, and these things are just super solid, and it's just a beautiful tree just to outline the structure of the tree.
Yeah.
So I've just always loved just how sturdy and durable these trees are.
Yeah, and I agree, ditto. It's from many years ago, I've always said white oak's my first favorite tree because I close my eyes. I try to visualize when you say the word tree, and that image you have up here, Michael, is exactly what comes to mind. I also want to add to that conversation where you started out. The tree selection, we absolutely need to make sure that we're looking at this over time. So we're selecting plants that will stay within the appropriate space, looking at the local environmental conditions, the drainage, the soil types, sun exposure. So those same criteria, whether you're talking about native tree or an introduced type, we absolutely have to look at our site correct from that perspective in the beginning. The other, we have had some questions. We don't have to answer them right now, Michael, Joel, but I just do want to put in one of the questions that we had from Karen was that she moved to Virginia several years ago from Illinois and kind of wanted a summary of the trees, which you're talking about, particular attention to magnolias. So I hope we make time to cover those. And also make sure we include sort of resources and places people go for information about native trees. So
well, I think that's an easy one.
And was
I think
David, you're muted that last segment.
David just muted himself there. I'm going to answer that one though. If you need information about native trees, you're more than welcome to call or come on into Merrifield Garden Center, and we've got experts at any of one of our 3 locations that'd be thrilled to give you any information you're seeking.
Absolutely. And then and this is great because you can actually come in and see the trees and we firsthand have dialogue and conversation. Like I said, we are also supporters or participants with the Plant Nova Natives, and their website also is a very good resource on locally native tree species. So either of those, definitely us, we want to see you always. And then if you want to look online, a good selection there. Plus, like I said, we're having this webinar today and other resources throughout the month highlighting them.
And I'm going to be doing another native tree talk this coming Saturday at 10 a.m. here at the Fair Oaks location. Also, it's an in-person thing. It won't be online, but I'd be thrilled to have anybody who wants to join for that as well. I'm not going to go into extreme detail about all the other oak species on here, but I put everything on here by botanical, so I feel obligated to at least offer the common names for those, and then just a few thoughts. The bicolor is swamp white, Quercus coccinea is scarlet, Macrocarpa is bur oak, Palustris is pin oak, Phalos is willow oak, which is the one with the narrow, willow-like leaves, and then Rubra is northern red oak. I could probably, I think on any given day, I'm known for using the term favorite a lot. And on any given day, you might catch me saying a different one of these is my favorite. But yeah. I think willow oak and bur oak, Macrocarpa and or Phalos and Macrocarpa, I think those are 2 of my favorites. Again, I'm gonna agree with Joel and David there. White oak is absolutely your quintessential, oak, which is why it's our national tree. But willow oak, to me, equal in terms of architecture, shape. I love that narrow willow leaf. I just, some of the willow oaks in the DC area are just exquisite specimen. You see them absolutely absorbing the curbs and the sidewalks and the streets. And you think about the environment that they're not only surviving, but thriving in. And what they bring to that environment, to the city there, is just absolutely miraculous. And then you think about, what they would be like if they weren't in an urban environment, and you see them out in these, fields where they've got everything they need, full sun from sun up till sun, and they turn into this majestic, rounded, absolutely perfect tree, silhouette like you see here. And I can't say enough about willow oaks. That's just always been one of my favorites.
Oaks are really exciting also because there's a lot of variability in their leaf structure, their branching habit, their bark. So just definitely even in the whole, there's just a tremendous amount of variability, and it's exciting in that fall color differs between different species. What's really nice in terms of for wildlife attributes is that There's a lot of different species of caterpillars, like moths and butterflies that are going to feed on the foliage. And we're all very familiar with acorns of the oaks, and that's a fantastic food source for birds, small mammals, all kinds of other wildlife. And then you get the massive branching structure, and it's a great habitat for birds and those other small mammals.
So Joel, I'm glad you led us right into our next slide there. Proof is in the pudding for sure. You can see obviously everyone's familiar with acorns that the oaks produce. That's a major food source for everything this time of year. I know this year, some of the old, Farmer's Almanac stories, and I know what a lot of people look at is fruit production to determine what kind of winter we're having. I certainly hope that the fruit production that I'm seeing from the oaks in my neighborhood right now is not an indicator of the winter we're having, because you can't see a driveway in my neighborhood right now. There are so many acorns on the ground. But again, that's, you see the squirrels even caching those things away, and then all of a sudden where they've forgotten where they've buried them, you got oak saplings coming up the next year. And Joel mentioned the species of butterflies and moths that they support. That's a 534 species of Lepidoptera supported. That's, oaks in general. That's a direct number from Doug Tallamy and his observations. It's not just species of moths and butterflies, though. This image is a yellow-rumped warbler that I observed eating not only insects on this tree when this is a willow oak right off my mother's back porch, but not only did I observe that bird as it's returning for migration, eating insects on the tree, but I watched it pulling bud scales off of the vegetative buds that hadn't broken yet, and it was eating the bud scales, and it was plucking individual grains of pollen off of the male flowers as well and eating those. So it was just eye-opening to see, up close what different parts of the tree were providing. Again, that's just one bird, one species that I was observing. There's no telling what else these trees are actually supporting,
Yeah, and I'll just mention, we touched on this several times, but really this is the key point, I think, with trying to get more native vegetation back into our landscapes, because as we just lose more and more and more land to development, it becomes more and more critical we replace some of these key species in there that support all the life that Michael and Joel have been talking about. So this kind of holds true throughout the whole presentation. But I just don't know if we really quite clarified that and need to say it enough. That's really why the emphasis is on getting these native trees and other plants back into our landscape.
Absolutely. And oaks especially, I know a lot of people, I don't want to dodge a topic. A lot of people are concerned because of the oaks that have been coming down. We've got mature oak trees that, people are seeing coming down in the forest. And I've been reassured by several of the top minds in the industry that whatever we've been seeing in some of the mature oaks, whether it be a change in our environment, whether it be a pathogen or a pest, that the new oaks that we're seeing planted over the past 10 years, we are not seeing that in, and we are seeing great success in newly planted trees, which was really a breath of fresh air to me. We learned so much about pathogens and insects that are negatively impacting our native trees. It's always really nice to, be reassured that the new trees that we are planting are coming up successfully and are not experiencing the same problems as they're getting established in their new environments. So the message there is certainly do not stop planting oaks. If you're on a property where you've had mature oaks come down, continue to plant them, and hopefully we'll continue to see success over the next 20 and 30 years with those new plantings. So again, moving on, we could talk about oaks and all the different types of oaks all day. I know Platanus is one of my favorites for sure. Sycamores, we've got a beautiful one planted in the shrub section here. I've spent a lot of time up at Great Falls and the Riverbend area along the Potomac, where there are just some absolutely majestic sycamore down along the Shenandoah. Even at the park near where we live, David, there's some absolutely majestic sycamores down along the stream banks there as well. And again, the food that this produces for the wildlife, the size of the actual fruit is just, it's invaluable to the local wildlife.
So I'm just thinking as I'm looking at this, and I love the sycamores also. Again, the beautiful mottled bark, gorgeous branching, all these wonderful things to say about. But some of these trees, like we're talking about the both the oaks and the sycamores, they can be a little bit messy as a landscape tree. I'm just worrying both to Michael and Joel back to the tree selection and using these as landscape trees. If you have pointers or thoughts or any comments about that.
Joel, what do you think about that?
Good question.
I think for David, I hear a lot of concern when customers are looking for trees, and they, often it'll be a tree that I wouldn't have expected somebody to deem a trash tree. And I'm, using that term with quotations around the word trash. And I can't help but think to myself, everything's got something, right? So, you don't want leaves on the ground when you plant a magnolia. You get big, leaves that it drops when it's time to go through its shed. And but the benefits of that tree far outweigh the little bit of mess that it leaves behind. Well, similarly, I think of the oaks, and I mentioned my neighborhood right now is littered with the acorns. So yeah, I think it's not necessarily one that is a great species for over top of your driveway. I would probably consider the size of the fruit, the density of the fruit, whether it produces a fruit, before planting that as like framing the entrance to my garage where my cars are going to be parked underneath. But I think, out in the ornamental landscape, these trees absolutely have a space. It's like, you're talking about the other side of it is their durability, their drought tolerance, things like that. Once you get these trees established, we're talking about sycamore, growing along waterways. Well, that's also a great choice for out in an open field at a high point where it doesn't necessarily experience flooding, and where, once you get that tree through establishment, it exhibits some impressive drought tolerance. And then these are big, majestic, stately features in an ornamental landscape. So I think being cognizant of all of a tree's characteristics is always very important when it comes to planting location. But to me, everything has something that you could point to and nitpick as to why you wouldn't. So let's focus on the why would you,
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I won't even use, I find the term a trash tree offensive. I would respond saying one person's trash is another person's treasure, right?
Yeah.
But as you said it, and you said it perfectly there, just be cognizant of all the plant's characteristics. Back at the beginning, kind of knowing that and being prepared for that and planting it in the appropriate site. Again, because these are phenomenal trees, but they just need a little space and a little planning ahead of time.
And again, even like a sycamore, look at the bark interest just on these two limbs in this image. That's impressive. That's unparalleled in a landscape. And then you think about getting that on the actual trunk of the tree and having plantings around it, understory stuff, having this being the stately feature in a shade garden. Maybe you've got ferns around the trunk of the tree, and then you have this stark white exfoliating bark coming out of that patch of ferns. I just think there are so many places for a tree like this in the ornamental landscape. And then, again, I've got an image here of two, juvenile young owlets. And it's like, well, this is a tree that's not now just providing a food as a resource, but, this is also providing a home. We get these cavities in trees. I know this is something that's near and dear to you, but, you get these old trees that all of a sudden go through the cycle of life. And as they start to age, they start to, no differently than us, they start to
take it easy.
They start to develop these, physical quirks. And all of a sudden, potentially you have a wound that the tree starts to grow tissue around and develops a cavity. well, now you've created a home for wildlife and not just a food source, you know?
Yeah.
And that's true of all of these overstory canopy trees. It's not just sycamores, it's not just oaks. You know, big trees with blemishes are invaluable in the forest, in the landscape. So, you know, that's something to consider too. Without the overstory canopy trees, if we're just planting all young ornamental small trees, you're not getting a lot of those benefits of habitat that you would without the overstory.
Yeah, absolutely. And since you mentioned, I just keeping a little bit of an eye on our time. Most of our questions are about this smaller understory tree. So I want to make sure we have time to get to that topic as well.
Yeah, so we'll keep rolling. So this one's one of my favorites. I know Joel loves the botanical name on it. Sweet gum is you know, another one of these overstory canopies. I think you know, similar to bur oak, got a real corky branching habit, really corky bark structure. Again, obviously providing some coverage from the rain for certain wildlife out there.
Fall colors pretty much out of this world.
Yeah, fall color is unparalleled.
Oranges, yellows, reds, purples, glossy leaf. I mean, it just, when the sun shines on it, you got a dark backdrop in the sky. It's
Absolutely.
pretty special.
Absolutely. And the leaf texture too. It's not just your, you know, very typical leaf like a cherry or an elm or a dogwood. It's an interesting star-shaped leaf. So it gives you a great texture in the landscape. Again, you know, sweet gums are incredibly durable trees. It's probably one of our most underutilized native tree that also provides ornamental value. And I'm sure, David, the reason for that is probably because of the fruit set that they produce. You know, when you look at that sweet gum, you know, spiky ball, rocket shaw fruit, whatever you want to call it, that, you know, we used to throw at each other as kids, and I used to walk on barefoot to try and build calluses on my feet. You know, that again, you hit the nail on the head. And the last topic was, is that a nuisance for people? Well, again, if you're planting native trees, you know, why are we planting native trees? You know, and a lot of times it is because of the resources. Sweet gum also, with their flowers, produce an incredible amount of nectar and pollen and food source for moths and butterflies, just as oaks do. So yeah, I think it's an invaluable tree in the landscape for ornamental value. You heard Joel talking about the fall color, and there it is. I mean, I know there's the main road that runs through my neighborhood, there are some that turn so purple they really look black.
Yeah.
You know, and conveniently, it almost always happens right around Halloween.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect backdrop for all the trick-or-treaters to be out running around against.
Yeah, as where I happen to live, it was predominantly ash trees, and where the ash trees have died out, now it's understory of sweet gum filling in under them. So again, I love the fall color, and I'm happy to see them there.
Yep, absolutely.
I am not going to go walking barefoot on it though to build calluses.
That was when my notably, this is a don't try this at home kids moment, but when I was old enough to start mowing the lawn, we had a beautiful, massive sweet gum in the side yard. And I remember I used to mow the lawn barefoot, and I would really try to tough it out walking through that section when the rocket shaws were on the ground. And I remember there, you know, just trying to make sure that I didn't break a sweat or you know, I always maintained a smile walking over top of. That's how I knew whether or not the pads on my feet were getting there or not.
But I will share, I've had some gardeners that collect those and put them in their garden as a mulch, and they say that it deters slugs, and I imagine it would be good for that.
Wow.
That's interesting.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That's a cool little fun fact. Yeah. So, David, I'm sure these pictures look familiar to you. I'm pretty sure I borrowed these from you when putting this together.
Is this the one in our
This has to be like a mutually agreed upon favorite, right up there with the white oaks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Hands down.
yeah, this is, so the larger image here is actually the black gum that's on our property here at Fair Oaks. You know, this is one of and again, I don't want to say anything poorly about us. Obviously, we're in the business of planting trees and plants, but we certainly don't provide this tree any extra care. It's probably in one of the more abusive environments, and this is what it looks like year in and year out. It's just absolutely the most incredible fall display, and the tree itself is just, I mean, it's just a perfect from head to toe majestic structure tree.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this, Louis, the image shows they naturally tend to grow in sort of moist environments. So it does quite well in dense, heavy clay soil, or as Michael was saying, this compacted with a parking lot underneath it, and everything. So this is a tree that will tolerate low oxygen soils, the really harsh, horrible environments that we're trying to grow trees in. This is one that seems to really even be able to thrive in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I've been so impressed, and we've been planting more and more of these over the past decade. Black gum has been, really the interest in that species has really increased dramatically, and the success of those trees being planted, the growth rate, the shape of them, the fall color, they just seem to do so incredibly well. I see why there's been such an increase in the demand for the tree. Obviously a great resource for wildlife, flowers, fruit. One of the things that I always
honey.
Yeah, the honey, absolutely.
Yeah. Tupelo honey.
That's right, Tupelo. Yeah.
It's one of my nicknames.
No, Joel's right. I mean, black gum, black gum's a common name. One of the other common names is black Tupelo. A lot of people are familiar with the song. Maybe a few people have had the actual honey that's produced from black gum blossoms, but it's Tupelo honey. Actually, I don't know if you know that Tupelo honey supposedly will never crystallize. That's one of the characteristics of the honey. And I had a friend bring me some back when he went, I guess he was down in Georgia, and it's one of the places they really produce a lot of it. And he brought me a big bottle of it back. And I'll tell you what, I left that in my pantry for probably close to 6 months or so. Any other honey in the pantry would have crystallized. Of course, honey in my house only lasts about a week.
You're drinking it straight from the jar.
Yeah, but even after 6 months or so, that stuff, I mean, it hadn't crystallized at all. It was incredible. So if anybody else knows anything else to be true about that, I'd love to hear otherwise. Otherwise, I think that's an experiment we should all try, is get some Tupelo honey and see if you can get it to crystallize, and give me your feedback. But yeah, it's incredible tree. One of the things that I noticed about this tree, and I've heard other people say, woodworkers specifically, mention how thick and durable the wood is. When we had the snowstorm in 2010, I think that was the one we deemed Snowmageddon. The lower limb on this tree must have had 20 to 30 inches of snow that was sitting on it. And for probably about a week, freeze thaw, that snow sat there, turned to a block of ice. And there were several times I was looking at that and thinking about how much that weighed on that lower limb. And that lower limb on this tree that sticks out over the sod bed is so long. And I thought for sure at some point that lower limb was going to give way. And I mean, it never even batted an eye at the weight of that snow frozen on top of there. And that was something I remember talking to a good buddy of mine who does a lot of woodworking. And he said, oh, no, you can't even put black gum in a wood splitter. If you were splitting firewood, it'll break your splitter. It has the thickest, most dense wood of any tree in our native forest. So that may have had something to do with an uptick in interest in black gum after 2010 for sure.
So I just also adding in conversation, we've had a couple questions about the tulip poplar, just basically both questions asking about, hey, they have volunteers, should I keep it or take it out, about its suitability in landscape. I don't know if that's in your slide set, but I want to make sure we do get a chance to talk about that.
Yeah, I saw that question down. Should I cut it down or should I leave it? Well, I suppose that depends on where it's growing.
Right.
Tulip poplars,
tree.
Yeah, redwood of the east. I would think if that was growing right next to the foundation of my house, I'd probably at least want to relocate it. But I would never encourage somebody to cut it down if it was in a space where they thought they could use a tree and that was a suitable species. That's a great tree. That's one of my favorite native trees. I love tulip poplars. fast growing. I'm of the mindset, I don't want to plant a tree for future generations as much as I do, and I'm thrilled to have that tree live for future generations. I'd like to enjoy the fruits of my labor now, so to speak. So tulip poplar is one of those trees. You can get a really good substantial tree in a short amount of time by planting a fast growing species like a tulip poplar. Elm is another one. We'll roll through the rest of these overstory species here. Elm, this is actually a really interesting scenario. This is a field. I took this image at one of the growers that Joel and I visit through the winter, and they had a 1,000-year flood instance that had filled up this valley and turned the entire valley from mountain to mountain into a lake. And they said the floodwaters didn't retreat for about 2 weeks. And when they did, it left every other tree that was in this field, dead, root rotted. And the only tree that remained and that withstood that flood was this gorgeous American elm. I can't speak to if it's a seedling or a cultivar or any of that, or Dutch elm disease. All I know is standing there thinking about a 1,000-year flood occurrence, and everything else in this valley wiped out except for this tree was just, beyond belief. Elm's definitely one that I think it's had its peaks and valleys of interest, but I think it's one that you can't be planting enough of. It's another tree that you really see a lot of wildlife benefit from. Everything from and again, there's a little bit of a theme here, David. We're decreasing in the size of our fruits as we progress through the species in these slides here. But the important thing is that these seeds, that people see as seeds, these are still fruits on these trees that are a resource for wildlife. Even the smallest seed is providing a food source for the local wildlife. Even the smallest, most unattractive, least ornamental blossom on these trees is attracting insects that's then a food source for something else, or is potentially, going to pupate and turn into a butterfly or a moth or something, so I think it's imperative that we focus on, diversity as well. So it's one thing to say, hey, this is the right tree for my landscape. But I think often there are scenarios where the answer may be multiple trees. And these are all very viable options. Elm is definitely no different than oak. I think of that as that quintessential, field grown, open specimen, umbrella shaped canopy silhouette tree. When somebody uses a logo or a silhouette logo for a tree, that elm is often what I think of too,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, we did have somebody questioning a little bit about the status as far as like Dutch elm disease. There's another question. I don't know if you're familiar with what the situation is with chestnut blight, and kind of how that plays into these tree selections.
Well, a lot of the newer cultivars that we're sourcing and providing here are Dutch elm disease resistant. Valley Forge, Princeton, New Harmony, Jefferson.
Yeah. And Joel's right. I mean, all of the newer cultivars of American elm, they've been testing these for a long time now, and they are proving to not get Dutch elm disease. So we're having great success with them. Chestnut blight. Right now the Dunstan chestnut has been the one that people have been planting. I know the state arboretum has planted a lot of chestnut. I say the state, that's the one out off 50. I know you know it, David, but for everybody else, I didn't say that unintentionally. It's not the National Arboretum, but the state arboretum here in Virginia. They've been planting a lot of Dunstan chestnuts, a lot of chestnuts that they're trialing. Dunstan is, I don't quote me on the exact percentage. I can't remember if it's 99% or 96%, but it is back crossed with the Chinese chestnut, but it is mostly American. But again, I think so far we've had great success with that tree as well. As far as the elms go, we're not having trouble with Dutch elm disease on them. I think it's important to consider anytime you're planting any tree, especially a tree that in theory is susceptible to a known existing pathogen. You want to be aware of planting location. This goes back to the right tree, the right place, right? So I'm not going to take a tree that has a known pathogen issue or a known pest that is able to take over and plant it in the absolutely most stressful environment possible. I'm going to take a tree that I know is going to thrive in that environment, and I'm going to use that species. I want to be selective there, because if you've got something that you know is susceptible to a local pest or pathogen, let's give that tree its best chance to thrive, you know?
Yeah, and this is really my question to both of you at some point today. I want, because both Joel and Michael are part of our purchasing team. I do want to touch on availability of some of these native plants, because I know in the past there was just sort of a supply problem, but hopefully I've seen a lot of improvement in that, just almost me as a consumer here.
Yeah. Yeah, we no, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I think I've always said the demand drives the supply a lot of times in our industry, and I think that's been true. At one point, people were interested in planting Bradford pears, and that was the predominant tree, Bradford pears and red maples. And at least over the course of our short career here, which again, we've still got a long ways to go, we've seen drastic change in demand, which has driven supply. And there are a number of different growers that are absolutely producing native trees, fantastic quality of native trees that are suitable for ornamental landscapes. It used to be, if you wanted something native, you could assume that it was going to be ratty and it was going to be native looking, Right. Now, we've at any times had 60 different types of native trees throughout the garden center, and they may all be ornamental A+ quality retail trees.
Really nice branching structure.
Yeah,
beautiful. What's exciting is when we tour a lot of these nurseries, these growers, they're a lot of times asking us, what should we be growing?
Yeah.
We hear that a lot. What should we be growing? What should we be growing? So here we are able to provide them feedback on what they should be growing. And it again creates this ultimate positive feedback loop between the consumer, the supplier, and the grower, the provider. Yeah. So it's actually really an interesting, living, cohesive web. And I've seen it, just in the past couple of years that I've been working here at the Fair Oaks store, actually, managing and purchasing the plant material, that it's very much this beautiful, it's like a beautiful dance between all parties involved. So it's actually really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. David, we're going to roll through the next few just real quickly, because I know we have been getting some understory questions. We'll just hit on these real quickly. Tilia is American linden, basswood. I hate to breeze through these, but again, we could do this for hours on end. Amazing tree. Flowers, if you ever see these things in flower, it's clear they are just absolutely chock full of these. Yeah,
you can hear it.
I mean, the tree becomes alive, and that it is a known source for honey. Maples, again, everyone's planting maples for their fall color. I don't think people consider them as ornamental flowering trees as much as I really try to promote that. I think red maples, sugar maples certainly will be a little bit more green in their blossoms, but red maples, again, individually, the blossoms may not be a cherry blossom, big, flashy, ornamental, but as a whole display, that's how I always know spring is underway.
Absolutely. You just see them glowing. They just almost just glow.
And then, again, the seed, I can't reiterate enough. It doesn't matter the size, no matter how small it is a resource for wildlife that is providing them a necessary food source at that time. Birch, Birch is another one. Again, I don't think we're going to really drive home the seed on birch as a fruit, for wildlife quite as much as the others. But I was really astonished to see year in and year out now, and I imagine they're the same flock of birds as this flock of yellow warblers seems to be migrating. Our store here seems to be on their annual migratory path in the spring, and it seems to be the same flock of yellow warblers that hit the river birch up front of our property here. And for about 3 or 4 days, I will see them going through the birch trees when they're in flower, and they, no different than that willow oak and the yellow rumped warbler, will be plucking the individual grains of pollen from the birch flowers. And I've even seen them chewing on the newly emerging leaves as they're coming out. So again, I think, we have these preconceived notions of which parts of trees benefit wildlife. And I think there's so much more that we stand to learn if we take the time to observe. I think there's so much more we don't know. And that's why it's so imperative that we, you have this blind faith at times that, yes, native trees that naturally occur here that have and that will are important to continue to plant and continue to promote the local ecosystem.
And then, it's an excellent plant for winter interest.
Yeah.
Talk about its ornamental characteristics. You've got great fall color, winter interest, branching structure. So there's a lot of ornamental characteristics that make this plant a beautiful choice as well.
Yeah. And Joel's right. I mean, the bark on river birch is notorious. I mean, that's something that, birch bark. Also getting an opposing fall color in the landscape. You've got that nice kind of golden fall color, but even the spring blooming on them, a lot of people look at it as a pollen stick, but gosh, it's a gorgeous display. Which I think is a great segue into the understory canopy and our first candidate for that, which is American hornbeam. So similar in its flowering display to the birch, again, it's stunning. American hornbeam has always been one of my absolute favorites, small understory canopy trees. Fantastic structure, bark interest, flowering, fall color is stunning. This is just one of those trees I think is, again, one of the more underutilized trees for ornamental value that we carry.
Yeah, the bark is really cool. The branching structure, the way it twists and turns, musclewood, ironwood.
Yeah.
Reminds me a lot of myself, just, but you're right. It's just a fantastic understory tree, super shade tolerant. And, like you said about the catkins, those things just light up the tree.
Yeah.
Loaded.
They really do.
Yes, this is terrific. That's, I was just thinking, I live in a townhouse. What can I plant? But a lot of our questions about smaller trees, they got somebody asking about planting along a church driveway, another person's in dry conditions. So absolutely, I appreciate comments and keep them coming as far as their landscape use, because I think these smaller understory trees really have applications for a lot more people.
Real quick before moving on, there was a question about a black gum producing fruit balls, as does the sweet gum tree. They're very different. No, the black gum is a very small fruit, it's a totally different species than sweet gum. And this is the problem with common names. A gum is a gum when you don't know any better, but sweet gum is liquidambar, black gum is Nissa. They don't have anything to do with each other, really couldn't be any less similar, except for the fact they both are magical trees and produce incredible fall color. Totally different fruit set on the trees though. Hornbeam, again, just because I can't say enough about this species. Joel mentioned really does well in shade as an understory canopy tree. I've seen these grown in full sun up till sundown, crummy soil conditions. They grow in moist soils. They'll grow in dry soils. I can't say enough about the hornbeams. Redbud, So this is another one, I think, this is the marker that spring is here. If you live in Virginia, you're a homegrown Virginia native, redbud is a very sentimental tree to all of us, I think.
Yeah, this might be a good time to talk a little bit about species versus cultivars.
Yeah, so species, when we talk about tree species, we're referring to the seedling straight species. So this would be Eastern redbud, Cercis canadensis. So let's say, and again, I think anybody who's familiar with redbuds and have come to the garden center knows that we've got an entire section in our tree section devoted to all of the different cultivars, as David mentioned, of this. Let's say that one day this tree magically put out a branch that had a little bit of a purple colored leaf, and I went in and manually propagated that, took a selection off of that tree, and I named it Forest Pansy. Now that tree has been cultivated. It's a cultivated variety and is upkept by the intervention of us. And so now that's what we call a cultivar. It means cultivated variety. A variety would be a naturally occurring through sexual reproduction variety of that tree, which would be more relevant to like dogwoods. You get the
Pink dogwood.
Yeah, the pink flowering dogwood. That's naturally occurring through pollination. But there are many different cultivars of redbuds. I don't know if you've got a few favorites, Joel.
Appalachian red.
Appalachian red.
That's pretty strong.
Yeah.
I mean, the flower color on Appalachian red is pretty exciting. I do like the purple leaf varieties. They're glossy. Weeping forms. I mean, there's just so many, and there's new cultivars being released every year.
Yeah.
There's a lot out there.
It's very hard to keep up with.
Yeah, it definitely is. But there's a lot of leaf color, flower color, branching habit, structure, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of variety. But all of these, like Michael said, are cultivars, cultivated varieties. They're selections of a native, like you said, if a branch comes out a different flower color or different leaf color, or one branch in a million, is actually a weeping form.
Yep.
Those traits are seen as like a desirable characteristic, and then are selected out and then reproduced, and ultimately, long story short, turn into the named varieties that we have in the garden center. So they are, and this is a kind of the age-old argument of native versus cultivar and that sort of thing. So in my opinion, as long as there's no non-native introduced genetics, the plant is still technically native.
Yeah.
So,
and that's a good point too. And David, that again, I think the three of us probably feel pretty similarly on that topic, and I'm sure there are some folks out there that feel differently. But anytime there's a hot topic like that, cultivars, which I think the term nativar gets thrown around a little bit too. I always seek the guidance of people that have been doing this longer than I have, and that might potentially know a lot more than I do on the topic. And Alan Armitage made a comment one day when he was in town visiting and doing some lectures, and I really liked his approach to it. And he said, if the part of the plant that is beneficial to the local ecology does not change from the native species, then yes, I consider a cultivar native. And I thought that was a really practical approach to that topic.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and I would be fair to say, because both of you as buyers, you're making an effort to have straight species and cultivars available, just bringing good plants into the nursery.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, well, and that's the thing, there are people that want both, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, Eastern redbud as a seedling is a fantastic tree, and we do carry a lot of those multi-stem, single stem, want to have an assortment of sizes for everybody. But it's undeniable some of the cultivars are just stunning ornamental trees, and hopefully that's correct what Alan said. Hopefully that those parts of the plant that still benefit the local ecology are still doing their job as well. So here's another one, serviceberry. This is a great example of a plant that there are a lot of cultivars of. To be totally candid with you, it's very difficult to tell the straight species versus the cultivars because all of the desirable characteristics of the cultivars are typically very consistently throughout the straight seedlings as well. But serviceberry, Juneberry, shadblow, whatever you want to call it, Amelanchier is one of our most valuable understory native ornamental trees. It's fabulous.
Yeah, beautiful flowers, excellent fruit production, great fall color, usually sort of seen as a multi-stem kind of clump form, smooth gray bark. It's just a very attractive plant.
Yeah.
Got a lot of seasonal interest, fall color.
All right, guys, I feel we need to wrap this up in the next 10 minutes or so. So I'm hoping you've got dogwoods in here.
Oh, dogwoods? I think we might. It's a good question. Somebody asked somewhere about magnolia, right?
Yes. Yeah, we just asked for a rundown on the different types of magnolias, native magnolias, different types, options, and how to use them in the landscape.
So here's my favorite, which is Sweet Bay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, Sweet Bay, you could use it. Sweet Bay could be a specimen tree. It could be a naturalized kind of clump form that's a supporting cast member in the landscape. I've even used Sweet Bays in scenarios where it's been too wet to use other screening type plants with a similar foliage, like skip laurels and
try to plant.
and then of course we get into late May, June, July, and you start getting the fragrant blossoms on them. I mean, this is it's Magnolia virginiana. You don't get much more native than that. And then obviously you got great wildlife benefit in the fruit set on there too. You asked about different types of magnolias. Southern magnolias, I know we were having a lot of conversation about that last week, David. Southern magnolias at one point being considered locally native. Now there's a little bit more thought that maybe we're a little bit north, but then we were talking about what would Keith Tomlinson say, and still, again, a fantastic mid-Atlantic, North American Eastern Seaboard native, Southern magnolia. And there's so many different cultivars of Southern magnolia and Sweet Bay magnolia. Some of the cultivars of Sweet Bay will, maintain a more evergreen habit, as just the straight seedling will tend to go deciduous or semi-deciduous in a hard winter. Southern magnolia is reliably evergreen, and there's so many cultivars of that. A lot of them are for size or leaf shape. So there are dwarf cultivars, some that are the mature size of the straight species. Viburnum, again, we're talking about trees, and I think someone out there is going to question my judgment here, but I think viburnum is one of the sleeper options for trees because we sell it in our shrub section. And this is where I think sometimes we can hit the same options time and time again. And when it's time to get creative, there are some really good options out there for small specimen trees. This is one of my absolute favorites. I use viburnums of all different types for specimen tree use when someone needs something small and nothing else seems to quite fit the bill. This is black haw, Viburnum prunifolium. Black haw viburnum is one of our best native species, provides late fall, winter fruit for wildlife. This image was taken right around Christmas time. These fruits, if the waxwings don't destroy them in that 2-week window surrounding Christmas, they'll persist. Although they'll overly ripen and wrinkle on the tree, they'll persist into mid-January, late January, which again, that's providing an invaluable food source for wildlife at that time of year. Joel, I know you know a lot about the viburnums.
I mean, the plant itself is just a bulletproof shrub.
Yeah,
they're extremely durable, strong branching habit, dense branching habit, great fall color, flowers.
Yeah,
and it's thick branching habit does provide habitat and that sort of thing. So it really is a superstar. I think viburnums in general are superstars.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of them. I just tend to hit on black haw there because that's my favorite. Um,
We should probably talk about dogwoods real quick.
oh yeah, David's looking for dogwoods. We're rolling through dogwoods. Let's talk about dogwoods, David. We're going into evergreens.
All right, so let me hit you up a couple kind of questions back to back.
Okay.
So is Coosa dogwood native? Can we transplant it from a shady spot where it is not flowering to a sunny spot? Let's see. Hold on here just a second.
I think we answered Tina's question about redbud still considered native cultivars. It certainly is an opinionated question. I think we talked about that one. Coosa
It's not.
dogwood is not a native. That is the Chinese dogwood. You could transplant it from a shady spot where it's not flowering to a sunny spot. Keep in mind, if you're transplanting it, you'll need to water it more, and you may want to just hold tight on doing that transplant until it's dormant at this point, but it is not considered a native dogwood.
But with
Squirrels are, oh,
I was gonna say they would very much thrive in that,
Yeah.
that sunny spot.
It would love the
Coosa
sun.
dogwoods are rock solid.
Yeah.
the squirrels are eating red berries on my dogwood tree. Will this affect the number of flower buds I'll have next year?
Sure shouldn't. That's what those fruits are there for, other than our enjoyment. Those are the fruits, which in theory would be the seeds for the tree. The flower buds, which will be developing on the tree here at the same time. Flower buds are not the red fruits; they are different.
And any tips for planting a flowering dogwood?
Yeah, I think we've got lots of tips. I think that would be one where we would suggest, come on into the garden center and let's take a look at the trees that we're choosing from, and let's talk about your location and the environment the tree is going to be planted in, and we'll give you everything you need to know and more.
Yep.
Absolutely.
How much sun, whether it's morning sun or afternoon sun.
Yeah, how much you're going to be watering,
Yeah.
how to amend the soil based on
Right.
your.
What the soil is currently,
Yeah.
how to amend it, how to plant properly.
Absolutely.
All right, now I think we're caught up when we talk about evergreens.
All right.
All right, thank goodness.
Evergreens. Seemed appropriate to kick it off with American holly. American holly is again, it's not the fastest growing evergreen out there, and a lot of people are planting evergreens for screening. We're here talking about native trees for a reason. There's interest in other benefits here. American holly is debatably one of our most beneficial native evergreens here. Again, food source for so many insects in the flowers. I think American holly is probably not known to be one for its flowering because they are so small and discreet. But again, when these things are in flower, I do see a lot of pollinators going in there and hitting the blossoms. Incredibly durable plant. I think they're underutilized in a lot of harsh conditions where they would be a great candidate. And then you can see
some wet soil.
Yeah, they can handle. Yeah, Joel's mentioned they can handle wet soil. This is when you get into the Dismal Swamp. There's basically 3 species that are occurring down there, and American holly is one. I know back along the stream bank here at the property, there's an enormous patch of naturally occurring seedling American hollies that are just thriving. And if you walk back there after we've had a heavy rain, I mean, you're sinking into the mud. It's ankle to shin deep. They're just absolutely right along the stream bank there in floodplain, and they just love it. And then the food source, obviously, for the birds. This was a fun one for me because everybody buys hollies, not everybody, but when people are buying hollies for the red fruit, right, you're hoping for that winter interest. So what I've observed is that typically that fruit persists pretty well through the winter time. And then as soon as we get our first batch of returning migrant birds, those fruits are pretty much past peak. They're overly ripened, really wrinkled at that point. And that seems to be when they're attractive to birds the most, but they otherwise leave them alone throughout the winter.
Yeah, so it has excellent winter interest. It's a great habitat. The bark on the tree itself is just smooth and almost this gray white color. It's just a fantastic tree
And great leaf texture. Yeah, great glossy, sharp leaf texture. Eastern red cedar, again, another absolutely bulletproof native. Lots of different selections have been taken off of this plant now. I can't say enough for the habitat that these create. I know there's a lot of Eastern red cedar forest that I enjoy in our local parks. But again, everything from the male cones on the tree to the female cones, which we endearingly refer to as juniper berries. Those all provide a great source for wildlife, but evergreens also produce great habitat opportunities for wildlife. You know, so you see a lot of birds nesting or roosting in these trees as well, especially in the wintertime.
It's a great way to use a native tree for screening and naturalizing, and
Yeah.
so there's a lot of great uses that these junipers can be used in.
Yeah, and that you know, female cone, the juniper berry, I mean, that's a very different look for an evergreen. When that actually produces those cones, it's stunning. You get that contrast from the green needle leaf texture to the female cones, which is a really nice way to get blue in the landscape. So Eastern white pine and loblolly, these are two of my favorites. Both very, very fast growing, long needle, soft pines. You know, loblollies are known as a timber pine. They grow straight to the sky, super fast, great salt tolerant trees. That's something I don't think people consider it a whole lot. Eastern white pine is the one you see the most around here. Again, you know, very, very soft texture, fast growing, great dark color. You know, if you've ever watched birds hitting pines, it's really interesting to see what they'll go after. Sometimes it's insects. Sometimes it appears like they're going after the actual sugar production from the cones or from the fascicles that hold the needles in. This is a great example. So hemlock and Virginia scrub pine, Pinus virginiana. I think this is one of those unique scenarios where I really was able to learn, no different than the yellow warblers. I was really able to learn a lot about what Virginia scrub pine produced for birds. I watched these warblers hit this tree and go one by one in all of the fascicles down the branch. I don't know if it was pulling an insect out of that fascicle or if it was pulling sugar or something out of it, but one by one, it looked like a hummingbird hitting a hummingbird feeder. And these prairie warblers were hitting this Virginia scrub pine and literally not disturbing the needles at all, never dropped one needle off of that tree, but went inside the needle cluster there into the fascicle and were pulling some sort of food source off of that tree. So it really made me think, you know, hey, is there some sort of feeding habit here that's similar to what we're familiar with hummingbirds, where they are actually getting some sort of energy from the sugar production in the tree and not just from insects and you know, fruit set like we've thought in the past. You know, hemlock's another great one. Absolutely fantastic texture. You know, in the pine family, fast growing forest giant, really, really stunning evergreen, great cascading branching habit. You know, one of the things that I was learning when I was observing these warblers in the Virginia scrub pines, there was an area where I had seen the prairie warblers in cub run, and they tend to go back to the same spot every year. And it's Eastern red cedar forest, which is one of the images from the previous slide. So this year, my son had baseball practice out at a park where next to the park is all Virginia scrub pine forest. And I noticed it was very similar habitat, but different species, obviously scrub pine versus Eastern red cedar, but it had the same bird species that had nested there and decided to spend the summer there. So I started researching the bird species, and the description of the bird and their preferred environment was very specifically, they are a nomadic species that tends to find home in low growing scrub evergreen forest, and how important habitat was to their ability to thrive because of what preferences they have. And I just thought it was so telling, that here are these two patches of young scrub brush forest. And, as soon as those trees get larger, it's inhospitable to this species of bird. But as a young and up and coming forest, it's exactly what they're seeking. And I thought it was so telling that I was observing this species in these two areas, but then the forest between, which is more mature and doesn't have as much of that younger scrubby growth, they don't happen to exist in those areas in the summertime here. So again, I think it's very important. A lot of people would look at a Virginia scrub pine and don't typically think of that as an ornamental pine that they would plant on their property. Of course, I've seen some pretty majestic species as well, but that understory scrub growth is so imperative, and we don't always know why. But when you look a little bit deeper, you learn a lot,
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to jump in here real quick because we right now we're a few minutes over our time, which is really good for us in this crowd. I do want to say you can tell who the bird person is in this group, but I really appreciate that, because I think that's the deal. Is you're observing this. We watch and we observe, and we learn so much in the process of how all life interacts together in the forest. So I hope everybody does include native plants and enjoys all this as well. But I just I'm going to turn it over to you guys and give you like your 3-minute or 2-minute warning. You tell I don't watch football either, and sort of try to take this home.
Yeah, we're in the same boat there, David. I want to address some of the questions real quickly here. Somebody mentioned want to transplant an eastern red cedar at about 5 foot. How large of a root ball should I dig? That's a tough question, but they're very tolerant of being transplanted. Go bigger than you think, and I think you'll be okay. Make sure that the tree has had plenty of water before you dig it. Anytime you dig, you're severing roots, and you certainly are inhibiting the tree's ability to take water up to the rest of the tree. It may not be a bad idea to just hold tight for a little bit until we've cooled off slightly.
And then don't plant too deep.
And don't plant it too deep. Thank you, Joel. Yeah, trees can always grow their roots deeper if they need to. It's hard for them to grow back up to the surface where oxygen is present. Someone said something about, can you say anything about location for American Beech? Yes, I'm embarrassed that we didn't have American Beech in the talk. What a stunning tree. In fact, that's there's an area in the forest by my house that I covet. It's all beech forest, and you can plant an American Beech anywhere. This is a great forest tree, wet soil. You could plant it out in an ornamental landscape as a majestic standalone specimen. There's no wrong place to plant an American Beech. That is a fabulous, fabulous tree. John and Barbara Tessner, I'm going to make you come in on Saturday for my in-person seminar so we can talk about your question and spotted lanternfly. That's a can of worms we're not going to open now. Somebody asked, if you have a small lot or live in a city, should we focus on choosing understory trees? Are there canopy trees that are good in a city setting? No, you don't have to focus on or limit yourself to understory canopy trees. Yes, there are overstory canopy trees that are good in a city setting. There are many factors to be taken into consideration when planting trees, especially when planting trees in a space that they will outgrow. I am the biggest advocate for planting trees in environments where they will be what someone else might consider too big for that space. I'm notorious for that. I obviously do that on an informed basis. That's not anything that I would do without everyone and every party being aware of that. But yes, you can plant canopy trees that are good for a city setting. The other most important thing to consider is pollution tolerance. And there are absolutely species that we have identified as being more pollution tolerant than others. You know, bur oak, we didn't really hit on that, even though I mentioned it's one of my favorite species of oak. That has been identified as an incredibly pollution tolerant species of oak. And there's so many other ones. You can see the trees that are thriving in DC. I mentioned willow oaks earlier. But yeah, please, please, please visit us at the garden center. We would be thrilled to look at a few options with you and make sure that we're selecting the proper species for your actual property as well. Thank you for everybody that, you know, joined us today and is commenting on the quality of the webinar. Really appreciate that. Joel, you have anything else you want to mention before we let David close us out here?
No, if Joel, if you wanted to add anything before we sign off here.
Just wanted to say thank you very much. I appreciate being here. It's been fantastic.
Excellent. All right, guys. Well, hey, we did pretty good. We got that done in an hour and 15 minutes.
That's better than I usually do.
I thought it was going to be 3 hours. Tell you the truth.
Yeah, 3 plant people together and be able to contain ourselves to that. Thank you so much. As Michael mentioned, I think you've got a live seminar coming up on native trees. We've got more of these webinars available. You just stay in touch because we just love talking about our favorite topic, which is trees and plants and flowers. And really, this has been great. I really enjoyed having the perspective of a bird person on here, where I was able to learn a lot there as well. So again, thanks for joining us. And if we didn't get any questions, we'll try a follow-up on that. All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you.